Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Casting Seeds. I'm Savannah, your holistic health practitioner and host, and you're listening to the only holistic health podcast that uses God's singular truth to give you individualized discernment. Today, Jeremiah is not with us on this episode. He has work and other very important things to provide for our new growing family. But I am really excited to say that next week he's going to be helping me break down, because Jeremiah's in the tech field, an episode that helps us understand the whole TikTok and data situation. I feel like a lot of people in holistic health tend to avoid everything that comes to technology. They think technology is the antithesis of anything holistic, which is not necessarily true. And I feel like a lot of people also tend to get a bad rep with technology, especially in a biblical sense, and people don't know how to use it for God. So Jeremiah is actually going to do research all this week on websites and different things that actually help explain what it means when we get data leaks and how that can actually affect us in a bad way or in a good way in the future, so that so that the miscommunication breakdowns can stop. I am really excited for next week's episode and how we'll be preparing for that and the research we'll be getting this week. And if any of you have information on that, we would love for you to reach out to us and let us know. This week, I do have some nourishing news, which is really interesting. I know I haven't done it in a while just because it didn't really seem applicable. But I guess we'll get into that We'll get into that segment next, is what I was trying to say. But for this week's episode, what we're going to be going over, which normally we don't because I try to stay away from politics, but because we have a new president that is in starting January 20th, 2025, President Donald J. Trump became our 47th president. He's our 45th and our 47th president. I wanted to talk about the three big things that he did in the healthcare industry right away with his executive orders. Again, just to help people who may have preconceived notions or questions about what these mean and what happened. I am not biased. I did vote for President Trump just because I felt like he had other values and beliefs that fit more along my values and my beliefs compared to Vice President Harris. But I still have very much a laser pointed and hyper focused view when it comes to healthcare and making sure that it is not biased and it's only biased through God's perspective. So I'm not going to tell you guys whether or not you should agree or disagree with the things that were done. I just want it to be clear what was done and what will be happening and what could be happening within the next 4 years, so that people are prepared for that and they know what to do for what's best for their family, and also how to look into this research themselves, because I know that there can also be a lot of miscommunication and misinformation that can be spread on the internet and through even like ChatGPT and things like that. So let's get into some nourishing news. All right, for nourishing news today, I wanted to talk about the FDA. This happened before President Trump came into office. I don't think the FDA and CDC are going to be doing a lot soon, and we'll be talking about that after, because there was a big freeze that happened and there's going to be a lot of firings. But for holistic news and nourishing news this week, I wanted to tell you guys that there was a huge change in the US FDA. So I'm not saying that this is accurate in any other country, but specifically for the US, the good old FDA has allowed the food industry to change the name of aspartame, aspartame, to amino sweet. And a lot of people are going to be wondering, why does that matter? Aspartame, how could it be bad? So the key points of understanding aspartame, there are different brand names like Equal, NutraSweet, I think those are the main ones, right? Sweet and Low, I think, is another one. But amino sweet or aspartame is known for severe side effects in health in your gut and your hormone imbalances. So France banned the sale of any type of aspartame in all food and drinks. That is the only country that has banned aspartame. There's no other country that has done it in the UK or anywhere else, but it's because aspartame is known for the development of cancer. Aspartame is really known, especially for being in like gum and diet drinks. And that's one of the things that probably irks me more than anything, is because a lot of people will use diet drinks and diet sodas or a lot of gum chewing to help curb their appetite. But what they don't realize is that they're destroying their gut biome. So I'll talk about the metabolic impact. Despite being a calorie-free alternative, aspartame is known for having long-term and even forever consequences in your metabolic health. And some studies have even suggested that aspartame consumption may disrupt your glucose and metabolism long-term, leading to increased appetite, weight gain, and higher risks of metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. Of course, also that chronic inflammation leads to long-term issues like cancer and metabolic dysfunction in the long term for yeast development, like proper yeast development and proper bacteria development in your microbiome. Not to mention, when this happens, it also causes neurological defects. Aspartame contains thiolylane. It's an amino acid that can cross the blood-brain barrier and affect neurotransmitter levels in your brain. So it actually can literally make you more dumb because your neurotransmitters start to slow down, and that can cause things over time like Alzheimer's and other brain disorders that can happen in elderly age. It's also known for just having really high carcinogens in general. Carcinogens are basically the fire starters of cancer cell growth. So like tobacco smoke has high carcinogens, asbestos, benzene, and pesticides and other industrial chemicals. Physical carcinogens are ionizing radiation, ultraviolet like UV radiation. Biological carcinogens are known as viruses, bacteria, and parasites. And lifestyle factors like alcohol consumption and diet can cause high carcinogens. So carcinogens strictly damage the DNA, and those mutations are what lead to cancer, and they promote tumor and cyst growth in your body as well. So reducing the exposure to carcinogens is what helps limit and even helps stop any type of DNA fluctuations that can happen in your body. So high carcinogens are bad. And this is why France banned this completely, because it's known for having such a high carcinogenic rate, which is horrible. So the last thing I wanted to note is some individuals can just have kind of sensitive skin, but a lot of people tend to get headaches and migraines, or a lot of bloating is really common for people who have aloe sweet or aspartame, and allergic reactions obviously can happen, but more so than not, a lot of people who have consistent amount of aspartame tend to get significant mood disorders. So if you know people who drink a lot of diet drinks or chew a lot of gum, and they tend to be actually a lot more sad than normal, or have anger issues like bouts of anger, it actually could be linked to aspartame. So just things to think about when consuming diet sodas, especially for women who are pregnant. A lot of people have thought I was crazy when I have discussed with them that the dangers of sodas during pregnancy, or even just for women in general, are not great. Women need to understand that sugar, high amounts of high fructose corn syrup sugar, which is what they use in sodas, and even high amounts of cane sugar are horrific because it causes inflammation for you in your body. It's not necessarily carcinogenic like the aloe sweet, but it still doesn't do great things for you or a baby. And on top of that, caffeine is so bad for people. It is the number one addictive substance in all of the world. Number one is caffeine. I can go into that a different time, but a lot of people get really angry when I talk about how caffeine is not great for you. In small doses, it can be used in wonderful ways. Same thing with very pure tobacco, or the nicotine substance for tobacco. And again, we can talk about that another time, but specifically going into the everyday usage of sugars, caffeine, and carbonated drinks. Natural carbonation through yeast and sugar is very different than CO2 carbonation for your bones. And when women are pregnant and you have a bunch of relaxin in your body, your bones start to separate more, And that creates bigger gaps for CO2 to be able to get in, which can cause osteoporosis or even easier fractures when you're pregnant and or giving birth. So I am a huge advocate for not having sodas, especially during pregnancy for women, let alone diet sodas. But, to each their own. People can do whatever they want. I will just forever be anti. And yeah, if you guys have more questions, you can always message me on that. But let's move on to the main topic of this episode, which are the 3 very big executive orders that our new president, I literally can't talk today. That our new president, Donald J. Trump has done. So let's get into it. So on January 20th, 2025, President Donald Trump enacted several significant health policy changes through his executive orders. These are the top 3 that we're going to be discussing. The first is the withdrawal from the World Health Organization, or WHO. President Trump signed an executive order initiating the United States' withdrawal from WHO, citing dissatisfaction with the organization's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and concerns for overall influences and who is influencing them. This decision mandated the U.S. leaving in any type of funding or support to the WHO and an effectiveness within this year. So the U.S. was paying $500 million a year to be a part of the World Health Organization. And I heard President Trump actually talk about it today. He specifically said that with our population count, it didn't make sense. And he compared us to China, who has 1.9 billion people in it. I don't even think we have 1 billion people in the US. So I just double checked. China has 1.9 billion people. They were paying $39 million into the World Health Organization, where the US has approximately 250 million, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, especially with all of the immigrants who have come across the past 4 years. We're unsure, but the US was paying 500 million in comparison. So the reason why Trump pulled out for quite a few different reasons, obviously, as I mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic was something that he strictly disagreed with how it went down. We can't say how he would have handled it or what he would have or would have not done or whatever. He was a part of it for a year. And obviously, I don't know. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he tends to be very opposing of forced mandates on the American people. So what he did by pulling out of the World Health Organization was saying no one else can have American influence except for Americans making this decision of what they want. This is also one of the reasons why Trump is also paying back all of the military personnel who were fired because of vaccine mandates. He's going to give them all back pay for all of the time that they weren't they were called out of the military and fired, but he's also going to give them all of their jobs back if they want it. So ultimately, I'm not going to say that he was the only candidate that was fighting for freedom of speech or freedom of healthcare by any means, because I don't believe that. But I do want to make it clear that there is some sort of a safety net right now as a U.S. citizen, where if you are traveling to other countries or going to be put in the position where different countries have a different mandate than they do in the U.S., the U.S. citizen in those countries does not have to be held to the same statute as the citizens in that country. So, for instance, if you are headed to the United Kingdom, they are considering doing a mandate where they might do the vaccine cards again, where you have to show that you're proof of vaccination in order to go into certain places. U.S. citizens do not have to obtain that now because they're not a part of the World Health Organization. The only other thing that could be a negative that comes out of this is because the U.S. is pulling out of the World Health Organization, any group that is a part of the World Health Organization, so any country, including China, I don't know if Japan's a part of it, but let's just use China because we know China is a part of it. China could say that we now have a ban of all U.S. citizens coming in to our country because we know that they're not a part of the same regulations that we pay into. The World Health Organization is basically a giant club that you have to be a part of and pay into. It is a breakoff of NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's an intergovernmental military alliance established in April 4th of 1949. So basically, it's just a collective defense. And after that collective defense came together, which NATO started with 12 founding countries, it was Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Since NATO started, there's 31 members or 31 countries with in NATO. But basically, after this started, countries started coming together for different types of groups like the World Health Organization. It doesn't mean that everyone who's in NATO is also in the World Health Organization and vice versa. I mean, obviously, we're still in NATO. Are we? Let's double check. As of right now, we are still in NATO. But I have heard that Donald Trump is not a fan of NATO. So that's why I questioned it for a second, because he doesn't agree with all the administration's foreign policies and decisions, but there's been no official announcement or executive order with a withdrawal from the alliance. So it would be insane if he withdrew from that because the US was such a huge part in starting NATO. But the World Health Organization is also he's pretty much giving them a big middle finger. And I really wonder what's going to happen now in the future, especially because health is such a huge part of politics right now. So I just want to break down the World Health Organization, like what it does a little bit. And then you guys can decide whether or not you think it was a good idea for him to pull out, whether it's a financial basis or an economics basis on our end. I meant financial for like the country, economics for us individually, and then also just how we represent ourselves as Americans. Ultimately on this podcast, of course I'm proud to be an American, but ultimately I'm proud to be a Christian. No defining factor of where I was born defines me, only Christ does. And ultimately I want you guys to decide what's best for you and your health and to understand what's going on in our country around us right now. So first, the World Health Organization, it's known for its global health leadership. So it sets up global health goals and priorities and strategies. So we will now be removed from that. So it leads and coordinates international efforts addressing major health challenges like, for instance, the pandemic and non-communicable diseases or health inquiries. So these countries tend to get together and address what they all think would be best as a whole. And all of those world leaders, so like our president Biden, when he was a part of that, he came in and he made a decision with the UK and France and anyone who's involved in the World Health Organization. And then they all decided as a whole what they were all going to do with all of their countries and did treaties and agreements. A lot of people tend to think that the people who tend to pay more are the ones who really have more of a say. And I cannot say whether or not that's true. I'm not in politics. I don't know if it's true. I do know that it does happen with things like the FDA and the CDC within our own country, but I can't say. I know that it does tend to be where the money is. Those people tend to have a say on even just school boards and things like that. So I'm not going to disagree and say that it's not a possibility, but I also can't confirm that here on this podcast. And I'm about sharing truth and we don't know. So 2, disease prevention and control is one of the big things that the World Health Organization helps with. So they work to eradicate and control diseases like smallpox, malaria, HIV and AIDS, and things like tuberculosis. Has that necessarily happened? No, but they work towards it. So they also provide vaccinations, treatments, and health interventions, especially in undeserved areas, especially in underserved areas. So the biggest thing that a lot of people have problems with the World Health Organization is that all of these countries put in a ton of money into it. But just because your country puts a lot of money into it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the kickback from it. So I think that's why, from the research that I've done, President Trump was pretty much over it, saying like, we're going to withdraw. We put in $500 million in the past 4 years when Biden was in office, and we have not seen a penny back from any other countries. We've been giving and giving, and now it's time to fix our inflation rates and things like that our country is dealing with. And in the meantime, you guys can figure it out on your own. Do I agree with that? I'm more of a libertarian, so yes. But at the end of the day, I'm also not a government official, and I don't know what's best for the country as a whole. So if it does affect us all the way down to the dollar level and the tax level where our money is not being ripped away from us, then absolutely I'm going to be more for that, because the inflation has been so insane, especially for us here in California. And also with the fires and things like that, like we haven't seen any help from the World Health Organization in the past few weeks leading up until Trump took over and then withdrew. So yeah, I don't know. And people might be saying, well, like a fire disaster is completely different, but it's not, because a lot of those things that are mentioned, like illness and sickness, that happens more in fire hazardous areas. So there are so many things that have happened, including hurricanes and all these different reliefs that the U.S. citizens did not get help with, because illness is more likely in those places. So the World Health Organization definitely did not step in any way, shape, or form from what I've seen research-wise within the past 5 years. So the health standards and guidelines, the World Health Organization also develops basically health standards and guidelines of like overall health practices and treatments and policies. So whether we would like to see it or not, the World Health Organization also influences all the way down to your doctor's office, your local office. They set international health standards such as air and water qualities that are overall benchmarks. I am for the overall standard qualities. I do like it, but the only thing is, when we think about it on a holistic level, is the air quality in general, yes, it should be good. But when we think about the difference between air quality in California versus Utah, or Seattle versus New York, you can't really have a general standard, because more trees compared to more of a city is going to completely change the air quality and what can be filtered naturally. So it's just things like that, where if you think of it of a geographical standpoint, also water precipitation standpoint, just ways that that God created our world to naturally cleanse itself can't happen. So there are just things like that can be hard to really level out in a proper way. And then also to the fact that the World Health Organization can control even like your local health doctor's office, I'm not a huge advocate for personally. I do think that there should be general health standard practices that should be taught amongst doctors, of course. But I mean, again, different area, different people, different needs. It's hard for one whole organization to be able to say what someone in China will need, let alone a subsect in China versus Southern California. That's just my opinion. Emergency response. So again, this is what they're supposed to do. And I have not heard of any U.S. support in the past 5 years. They're supposed to respond to health emergencies like disease outbreaks, natural disasters, and humanitarian crises. They're also supposed to give coordinates of international efforts to manage public health risks. I would love for anyone to show me how this has happened in the U.S. in the past 5 years. I've done a lot of research and I can't find a lick of it. So $500 million times 4, not seeing a dollar or a dime back. The last few things that they do a lot of research and information sharing. Some people think that the research can be biased because, again, whoever pays for the research can also pay for the people who are doing the research and find more biased people. I don't know if they used like third party people for their researches. I have no idea. That's something I haven't looked into. But with any data or publishing or World Health statistics, it's always good to see if they use third care parties, is what they're called. So yeah, I haven't looked into that for World Health statistics now that I'm thinking about it. I only do it for like everything else, but I never look at World Health statistics. So capacity and building is also a big thing. They will limit the amount of people who can move into a certain area or grow, or basically even if there's like a huge population boom, they will try to offer more resources like, Planned Parenthoods and things like that. So not necessarily 100% for abortions, I don't think, in my opinion and in my research, but they will support men and women instead having jobs or doing things that may be outside of that area instead of settling down and having kids. So for the capacity building, which is really interesting, they actually made it very clear that they think that the world is overpopulated and that people should stop having children because it's not healthy for the world. They're very much Greenpeace and not humanistic. So just for this reason alone, I have always been anti the World Health Organization. There are actually videos of the World Health Organization leaders saying that because the world is overpopulated, people should stop having kids, and they are pro-abortion because of that, and pro the Plan B pill. So they advocate for those things, and they think that people in lower income neighborhoods are more likely to have children. So that's why they tend to put things like Planned Parenthoods in more lower income neighborhoods than not, because they literally want people to abort their children. So on that alone, I am very anti World Health Organization. I can get the links for you guys if you want, but it's also such an easy Google search. So yeah. The last few things are advocacy and partnerships. So obviously they advocate NATO and NGOs and academic institutions, and they don't necessarily recommend private organizations unless it is a private organization that is owned by one of the people within the World Health Organization. So they are only pro-private organizations that they have approved of, and they want to achieve their overall health goals, which is lowering the amount of people on this earth is the number one health goal that they have. The second one is making sure that the earth is sustainable for that amount of people. They have not come out with a number, like what's the healthiest amount of number for this world, but the day that they do, we should probably not be excited about it. Lastly, the International Health Regulations, the IHR. So this oversees the implementation of the legal framework that comes to help countries prepare and respond to public health threats and international concerns. So overall, I know this was a lot to take in with the World Health Organization. This was like actually just general information. I am so stoked that President Trump withdrew us from the World Health Organization. Personally, I love that he did it as a holistic health practitioner, I'm a huge advocate for individualized healthcare, people making the decisions of what they think is best, but also encouraging people to do their own research and to make educated decisions on their own. And the World Health Organization wants to withdraw that because they want you to follow what their needs and what they think is best for the entire world, not what's best for the individual. So for that, I give that an A+. I'm excited for it. Also, just financially, I think it's what's best as well. But just on the holistic and biblical side of it, A+ in my opinion. So Trump also did a rollback of protections for transgender individuals. I feel like this is kind of obvious as to where we're going to lean as Christians, but let's talk about it. The administration issued an executive order redefunding gender to be based solely on biological sex assigned at birth. This action effectively removes federal protections for transgender and non-binary individuals, impacting their access to healthcare and other services. The LGBTQ plus advocacy groups have expressed strong opposition, which is not true. I follow a Gays Against Groomers page, and they are so happy that this is a thing. But apparently a lot of LGBTQ plus advocacy groups have been upset over the plan to change these measures in court. Ooh, so obviously, as a Christian, God made it very clear that he made Adam and Eve and nothing else in between, baby. There are men and there are women. Those men and women are supposed to marry men, marry women, and women marry men. And that's how we create families. And that's it. There's no in between. None. And I know that there are a lot of people who struggle with homosexuality. That's not even a question. They are not any less loved by any means, or even people who struggle with transgenderism. If you struggle with these things, you are not unloved in the eyes of the Lord. But also, if you feed into that sin daily, then there's repentance that needs to happen and a genuine change and circumcision of the heart. And if you claim to be a Christian, but do these things daily, the same way that if you claim to be a Christian, but you are an alcoholic, or you claim to be a Christian and you lied all the time, of course, people would say, hey, you're not bearing the fruits of the Holy Spirit. You're not acting like a Christian, and you're not representing Christ. There are no fruits being like hanging low from your tree, basically. And Jesus says that he prunes those off of the vine, right? So we want to always go back to scripture when we think about our opinions and think about God's love. God's love is also just in the fact that he can do whatever he wants with his creation, and he created the rules for what's best for it, okay? God's love is that. I mean, it's loving. So he's understanding and he gives grace, obviously. But with that, there's also God's truth. God is holy and he is truthful. So in that holiness and in that truth, that means that there's right and there's wrong. So it is morally incorrect and wrong for a Christian to ever think that it is ever okay for someone who was born a woman to say, I was born incorrectly. God made me wrong. He messed up. He messed up on what he did. And this is the result of sin. And it's not God. That's not true. That's not how the Bible works. When we talk about even kids who are born with deformities, right? If you're born with a leg weird, or I know someone who's born with their heart outside of their chest, no one in their right mind would go up and say, God made you wrong. With the person whose heart was born outside of their chest, it was actually really humbling because he went on, he didn't live very long. He only lived into his mid-20s, but he went on to talk about how much he loves the Lord and how God made him perfectly, because now he had a bigger voice. That's what he used to say. He said, I have a bigger voice now, the fact that my heart is weaker. Oh, and it just broke my heart in such a good way, you know, like he got to speak on behalf of the Lord and say, like, I'm in pain all the time, but I know that I have a God who is going to give me a perfect body in heaven. He was able to share the gospel with so many people. Same thing with my friend Brittany, who passed away. She had liver failure. God used her in so many ways. She created 8 marriages out of the friendships that she cultivated. She died at 28 years old. And I'm going to tell you, if you look at life and how God can use you and mold you and the desires he puts on your heart, and like her desire was to be a wife. And, so she did. She went on dates. She was like, God has called me to be a wife. And she was like, I don't even know if I'll live to ever be married, but he's called me to do that. So I'm doing it. She went on date after date after date, became friends with all these wonderful men. And guess what? At her funeral, when she passed away, I like to say that her web collapsed, right? All these people from over here met all these people from over here. 8 marriages happened from her web collapsing. So what I would like to say is, you don't know why God has put some desires on your heart and the purpose he's using them for, but anything that he does, of course, is as long as it's not sinful. It's even if it was, but either way, sinful and lustful and unadmirable desires are not from the Lord, but God can still use those things to be glorified. Does that make sense? I know people who have left the homosexual community who are now glorifying the Lord, saying like, this is how he used me to help bring me to him. And they've left that ideology and community. Do they still struggle with those things? I'm sure to a degree. And some of them have been healed perfectly. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we can use these things to glorify the Lord, and that's all that matters. And you were born with a purpose. You were born fully loved, and you were born to be into a community where we, as a community, a Christian community, the world church, can pour into each other and love on each other, hold each other accountable. And that means, yes, righteously judging each other and lifting each other up, and holistically loving on one another in a way where we lift each other up to the Lord to truly change and be sanctified by him. So with this transgender rollback, I give it, again, an A+. That's a personal opinion. You guys can decide otherwise. But I just want to make it clear that this, though I don't necessarily think Trump is a Christian, but even though he claims it, I will say this was solid. This I like. The last thing that I want to talk about today is freezing federal hiring and regulatory process. This kind of goes with the first one that we discussed with the World Health Organization. But so Trump on January 20th, he made a government-wide regulatory freeze as of right now. It was implemented, slowing all activities within the Department of Health and Human Services, the HHS, and other agencies. Additionally, there has been a huge freeze on federal hiring that was ordered, which could affect staffing and operations in high health-related federal departments. These actions represent a significant shift in the U.S. health policy, like significant, and the potential long-term implications for domestic and global health initiatives as well. So, what does that look like? What does freezing federal and hiring regulatory process mean? Federal hiring freeze. So a hiring freeze stops federal agencies from having new employees for non-essential positions. So these key details are like controlling government spending, reducing the size of federal workforce, and it evaluates a restructure of government operations, specifically in the FDA and the CDC. So this impacts all those agencies. It creates a limited availability to fill vaccines, potentially straining resources and reducing service delivery. So that includes any vaccinations and or medicine as well. So that's the one thing that can be kind of scary about this. With the federal freeze, it means that, people with type 1 diabetes may have a little bit harder time for the next few months getting their medication, which actually can be kind of scary. But last time Trump was in office, the insulin prices were actually at an all-time low, like ever. So I'm hoping and praying that can actually come back again, and the insulin levels, like prices, will drop. But you have to cut a bunch of people and do a bunch of things in order to get there, right? So I don't know how long that will take. Also, employees, a lot of current employees are going to be faced with either increased workloads or a mass firing, depending on their job description and or things that are going to be going with the ideals of whatever Trump's party has decided. So I don't actually necessarily know what those ideals are. I do love Mr. Kennedy that has come in, and I do think that he has a lot of great points. They haven't really been said besides saying that they don't trust the CDC or the FDA as of right now, but what's going to be done or said, we don't know. So there is a lot that's left up in the air, and I do want people to be encouraged to please stay on top of those things and do your research, and don't be afraid to also ask an email. I think 2 of my friends said that they emailed those organizations and they got back to them within a few months, but I don't remember what they asked. Also, job seekers, there's going to be a lot of new opportunities in the future for federal roles in the healthcare system. So right now, obviously, there's going to be a lot less, but and I would say that'd probably end within the next 6 months or so. They tend to get things done pretty quickly, but at least from what I've seen from Trump's party, the first 4 years that he was in presidency, exemptions are usually made for national security roles, emergency response positions, and then also job critical things to public health. So like the Centers of Disease Control Prevention, the CDC, and the Federal Emergency Management, the agency, the FEMA, they will still be able to work, right? And do what they're supposed to do fundamentally. It's just there's going to be a big revamp in how they work and what they do. So a regulatory freeze halts the implementation or development of new rules and regulations and guidelines. So this often includes like pending regulations that may be paused for review or revision, and then newly finalized regulations that are going to be delayed and withdrawn within the implementation of the program. So basically what's happening right now is any regulations that were currently made within the past 4 years during Biden's presidency is going over, like they're going over that right now and seeing if they agree with it, if they're going to remove things or keep things, because Trump already did this 8 years ago. So they're basically going to go over it again and say what was added within the past 4 years. Do we agree with it or disagree with it? And they have a huge team working on it right now, which is why I think it's going to go pretty quick because they made a huge statement saying that they want to make America healthy again. So if that happens, great. If not, I mean, as Christians, we know where we're going anyway. So why is this done? Normally, the first thing is a shift policy and direction. New administrations, political parties, they often freeze to reconsider and revise policies within the mandates and procedures. They also like to cut costs normally. They want to limit spending and restrict hiring and do some regulatory expansion if needed. The last thing is also increase oversight. So they want to review and any type of necessity or impact of any existing proposed regulations that might be on hold. The potential downsides, I already mentioned a few, but service delays is probably the biggest one in my opinion. Even short staffing, which can cause shortages in medicine and dosages. The economic impact also, industries awaiting regulatory approvals like healthcare and energy, that can affect economically if your town really relies on that type of work. So that's also something to consider if your city is a big healthcare city and you have a lot of doctors, nurses, things like that, or people who work for the federal agency, like Virginia could definitely be affected, for instance. There's also a lot of like morale issues, which is, in my opinion, the least to worry about as Christians, but for everyone else. The current federal employees may face increased pressure and frustration, like in moral and morale issues, if that makes sense. So because of the increased pressure and if people dislike the political party that's in, there could be a lot of anger and sometimes even manipulation, or people can do paid manipulation, which is obviously illegal, but things like that happen. So just those things can just be wary of it within the first 6 months to a year of a new presidency, which that's also kind of why going through the stress every 4 years, like it's like you have 2 years of kind of things that are calm, but that first year and that last year are just so crazy with political parties and situations happening, and it's just a lot can happen. So yeah, I know that this was a lot in this episode, and Jeremiah and I normally stay far, far away from political things, but for holistic health, we never want to ignore big things that are happening, especially in the world. And now we can't really walk down the street without hearing something that's happened across the world, let alone what's happening within our own country. But I mean, humans were not made to have international and national news in our faces all the time. We were made to be intimate and stress-free. Well, I should not say stress-free, but lower stress within our small communities, and like worrying about Like, how much corn do we have left for this harvest? Like, how can I love on my sister that's down the street who broke her leg? These are the worries that we're supposed to worry about and take care of ourselves individually, but within a giant, like a bigger community. And it's impossible to do that if your community is all of America, So I really, with all of this being said, as a conclusion, I want you guys to, of course, be educated, look into these things yourselves and find out what you agree or disagree with, right? But ultimately, I don't want people to be so hyper-focused on this and overwhelmed that it takes you out of a holistic and biblical standard of, one, God's in control. God appoints whoever he wants as leaders. It's a Bible verse, actually. Yeah, Romans 13:1. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, okay? For there is no authority except from God. He's it, baby. And those that exist have been institutioned by God. Romans 13:1. So with that, we have to remember there's God's sovereignty. This verse reflects all of the belief that all authority ultimately comes from the Lord, and he allows or appoints leaders for his purpose. Whether it's a blessing or discipline, fulfillment of his plan is the ultimate goal, okay? Also, the obedience to authority. This passage, it's just one verse, but obviously understanding that this encourages Christians to respect and obey governing authorities as long as it is doing what God commands. It cannot be in conflict with what God commands, okay? So this doesn't mean that we don't speak up and defend the Lord. We do. And yeah, I feel like it's self-explanatory. Also, we have to balance these things with accountability, right? While God allows leaders to rise, the Bible also shows that leaders are accountable to God and can face consequences for their actions, right? Think about Pharaoh in Exodus or King Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4. That's a great example. So ultimately, I don't want Christians to hear these things and feel overwhelmed and come out of a holistic state, which means that you are not fighting to be a great representative of Christ as an individual. You are not fighting for your individual rights as an image bearer, and you are not being a loving image bearer in the process of speaking truth. There is righteous and great healthy judgment that you should have and concern, and there also is love through that. But ultimately, take all of this with a grain of salt and understand that God's ultimate purpose and plan is still going to proceed no matter what. Trump is not some high, amazing king that represents Christ perfectly by any means. He is not a good representative of Christ also by any means. And I also don't even think he's a Christian, to be honest, from the things that I've looked into just in the past year. So I love you guys. And there's only one Savior, and it's Jesus Christ. There's only one Lord God, our Yahweh, our Father, our Abba, and there is only one Holy Spirit. They are 3-in-1 Trinity. And they are the only perfect, sovereign Trinity that is holy, the only one. There's been no other human, no other God, no other. That is it. I love you guys. And remember, as always, to keep casting seeds and keep always being a political force for your own family, for your own individual needs, and holistically do what is best for you and your family at the end of the day. God bless you guys, and I can't wait for next week's episode. We hope you enjoyed learning how to cultivate God's creation from a biblical perspective. Holistic health is to prioritize whole person wellness through Christ. Like and comment on what topics we're casting seeds or casting pearls.
If you found this information provided useful, subscribe to our podcast for future updates, leave a review to help us improve, and share this episode. We would like to remind you before we leave that perfect health cannot be attained in this world.
Only spiritual salvation through sanctification and repentance to God and turning away from sin will give you a perfect body in the kingdom come. Nourish yourself in the Word, in prayer, and in biblical fellowship daily.
Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to our listeners for making this podcast possible.
Always praying.
Keep casting seeds.